There you are. Hey, kia ora. Helen Brahms here, coming to you live from Surprise in Arizona. Hope you're all having a super fantastic, sparkling day. Welcome to Before the Dirt Nap podcast number 1504. So many books in so little time. So over the last, I guess about Friday, I started clearing the area in the room behind me, behind the curtains, so I could assemble my black metal bookcase. It's the only bookcase I have. All the other ones were sold and given away and that sort of thing, but it's the only one that I have. And so I cleared the space, got it all together, got it upright, found I was missing some screws. So Monday morning I was down at the hardware store getting some new screws and things, but over the weekend it got assembled and I started putting books onto the bookcase. And no, you can't see the bookcase, Kathy Baxter, because it is behind the curtain. And if I open the curtain, there's a whole bunch of boxes in the way of the bookcase. And so as I was unpacking, and I had already set aside, when I was sorting through the boxes, I was already setting aside ones that had books in them. And now I've started unloading them. You just Kathy says, I choose curtain purple. It ain't happening tonight. I'm going to wait until I get my table flipped, because I'm almost at the point now where I can flip my dining table. So it's still laying on its top. I just need to clear some more space so I can actually roll it over. But anyway, back to the bookcase. And I started unpacking all these books and I'm like, and I'm like thinking, oh, I remember that this is the book that da. And some of them were fiction, some of them were nonfiction, but you'd pick up the book and I'll go, oh, this is the one that talks about blah, 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 blah. And I go, that's really cool. Oh, this one talks about da. And I'm like, hang on, what's this one? And so I'd read the back of it and go, well, that's really interesting. I have no idea what I don't even remember buying that book. I don't know how we got that book. It may have been a gift. I don't know. But, excuse me. And I'm like going through, as I'm putting them on the bookcase, some of them are catching my eye. And I'm like, oh. And then I brought up a whole bunch of Brad's books, which had Lord of the Rings, Hobbit, and there was also a whole bunch from the series of Dragon Riders of Pern, I think it was called. P-E-R-N, yep, Dragon Riders of Pern. Now, I'm not a sci-fi reader. Oh, and then he had a series of Dune books as well. And I know that he was waiting for these to all to be made into movies and things, especially Dragon Riders of Pern. He would love to have seen that as a movie. Dune came out just after he passed away, and he'd be waiting to see that. So just seeing some of the books from his collection there as well, but also some of the biographies that I had up there. I'm a huge Cliff Richard fan. Most Americans will not even know who he is. Let me tell you, he is known as the Peter Pan of pop. He's like, hang on, 70, no. Shoot, I can't remember when he was born. 1930. Yeah, he's over 80 now, and he still sells out concerts. And is very, very big in England, in Europe, Australia, New Zealand. They know him very well. But he's known as the Peter Pan of pop. And the very first concert I went to see was a Cliff Richard concert and had an absolute blast. He's a great entertainer, great music. And I've always had a soft spot for Cliff Richard, anything. And I was surprised at how many books I had about Cliff Richard. I did have the programs from the 3 concerts in New Zealand I went to and saw him at. He was born Harry Weber in 1931, I think it was. But he's got great music. I mean, he's just he's always been in the top and in the top of the charts and everything else with stuff with the songs that he comes out with. He's done a few musicals and things in England. Very, very famous. It's about as famous as you can get outside the US. Most countries in the world will know who Cliff Richard is because he's been around for so long. The Americans, not so much. Some of you may have heard of him, some of you may not, but just type up Cliff Richard and there's a whole bunch of stuff that will come up. And so I was surprised at how many books I had about him. And I looked at him and going, I've only read one. I've got 5 other books that I can go read. And I have the programs from the concerts that I went, from the 3 concerts I went and saw him at. And I have most of his music on CDs. I'm dating myself. I used to have them on cassettes. Then I got them on CDs, but absolutely love his music. So I've found a whole bunch of his books. Then I found a book on 9/11, and I realized that I had purchased the book, but I had never read it. And I was flipping through it Monday. I was flipping through it on Monday on 9/11. I never had 8 tracks, Kathy Baxter. I never had 8 tracks. I had cassettes, I had records and cassettes and CDs. You're distracting me. Train of thought. So I was flipping through them, and there was pictures in there I had never seen. And there were stories in there I had never read. So I'm curious to go back and read some more of that. There's a whole bunch of travel books, which was not really a surprise. There's a whole bunch of genealogy books, not a surprise. But I did surprise myself that I had about 3 of the books. I actually had 2 copies of each of those books. And I'm like, how did that happen? And it's probably because I purchased those books in 2018. They got packed up with the house stuff and didn't go into the RV with me. And of course, when I was in the RV, I didn't realize I had them sitting in a box. And so I went and reordered them because I needed them for classes that I was attending. So that's how I ended up with 2 copies of some of my books, my genealogy, 3 genealogy books. What else was in there? There was a whole bunch of, oh my gosh, What's It All About by Michael Caine. That is a really cool book. I was actually at a book launch for that. We had breakfast with Michael Caine at a book launch in New Zealand, in Wellington. And I even got pictures. I'll have to pull it out, but I've got pictures of me with Michael Caine. It turned out that I was there with my ex-husband, and he was my husband at the time. And the guy who was the official photographer for the whole event was the guy who had been the photographer for our wedding. And he saw us and he says, "Let me know when you get in line." I went, "Okay." And so we made sure we didn't know when we got in line, and he took pictures of us with Michael Caine after he had signed out our books. But What's It All About? Great book. Awesome book. If you want a good book on Michael Caine, that's a great one to read. I also found ones on New Zealand cricketers that I'd totally forgotten about. And some of the stories from some of the tours that they have done suddenly came flooding back into my head as soon as I saw the Jeremy Coney's book. I saw the Crow style book on the Crow brothers, and just memories from stories that they had told on different tours that they had been on came flooding back. There was what other ones have I got? I found the book my grandmother has a story in. It's somebody wrote a book about the Women's Auxiliary Air Force, or the WAAFs, that were the Women's Auxiliary Air Force was the Women's Air Force prior to it being merged into the Royal New Zealand Air Force. And my grandmother was a WAAF, and very proud of that. And if you go to the Royal New Zealand Air Force Museum in New Zealand, which is down in Christchurch, her uniform is on display. There's information there about her. Some of her memorabilia is on, some of the stuff that she kept from her uniform and everything's on display. I even have a photo of me dressed in that uniform the weekend before I joined the Royal New Zealand Air Force. So we'd been Easter weekend, we're up at my grandmother's place, and she says, I got my uniform from MOTAT, which is Ministry of Transportation and Technology, a Museum of Transportation and Technology. And she said, you need to try it on. And I'm like thinking, I'm not going to fit her. It fitted. It was a little snug in a couple of places, but it fitted. And her hat was definitely too small for me, but we plopped it on the head. And I have a picture of me standing between my grandmother and my grandfather. And it was one of the last, not quite the last picture I had taken with them. But it was the last picture I had taken with them before I joined the Air Force, because we got home that Monday or Tuesday, and there was a letter waiting for me to say that I was to be on a bus the following Sunday to go down to Woodburn for the General Service Training School, which is where boot camp is. And I was being sworn in on the 1st of May of 1984, which will be 40 years next year. It's hard to believe, but we've actually got a Facebook chat going with some of the people from that course that I was on, the boot camp course, and we're organizing a 40th anniversary reunion right now. And I'm like, 40 years? Oh my gosh. Yeah, but I found their WAAF book that and my grandmother used to, they used to go on trips. All of the women that were in like the first and second intake for the Women's Auxiliary Air Force, they used to do these trips to around different places in New Zealand, to Australia. I think they may have even gone to some of the Pacific Islands. I can't remember. But she was always off traveling, and every year they would have a reunion and go off to some different place. And so one of them had taken on the task of writing a book about the WAAFs. And I came across that book, and my grandmother had actually had it signed by the author. And I said to her, so what do you think of this book? My grandmother was hilarious. I love my grandmother. Grandma turns around to me and she says, and I said, oh, this is awesome. And I was absolutely stoked to get a copy of the book. And I said, how many stories did you submit to this? Because I knew she had a lot of stories, and I knew the book was coming out because she was telling me about it. And she turns around and she says, well, I only put in one story. She says, I could have written the book myself. And she says, there's a lot of things in there that this, I'm trying to think, it was either Beth or Beverly, it was a B name, that she totally missed out on, and she should have put this story in and that story in, and she didn't talk about this or she didn't talk about that. And I said, well, why didn't you let her know? It was her project, and I wanted her to do it her way, and I was not going to interfere with it. My grandmother telling me this, and I'm like, okay, I get it. Someone's got a project, don't try and take it over. Got it. But there's this, she's, but the author got different stories from different WAFs that were there at the time, and about their time serving during World War II. So I also found that book as well. And I was sort of like super stoked to find that one, because it's such a special book to me, because of the service that I did in the Royal New Zealand Air Force, but the fact that my grandmother was one of the pioneering women in the Air Force in New Zealand during the Second World War. So I was kind of proud of that. But her favorite story to tell, her very favorite story to tell, was that she would always tell this, and she'd always talk about how my dad was the only male to ever play on the Women's Auxiliary Air Force field hockey team. I've got to specify field hockey, because in New Zealand we don't play ice hockey, and we call hockey, and it's on the field. That my dad was the only male to ever play on the Women's Auxiliary Air Force field hockey team. And I'm like thinking, well, hang on. I know the year that he was born. So how was that even possible, for a start? And it turns out she was 8 months pregnant with my dad, and she played the goalie on the team. And that's how my dad became the only male to ever play on the Women's Auxiliary Air Force field hockey team, with my grandmother being 8 months pregnant with him, and she was the goalie. So that was back in 1943. It would have been towards the end of 1943, because he was born in January of 44. So that was one of her absolute favorite stories to tell about her time in the service. What other books did I come across? Oh, there's, like I said, a lot of travel books, like 500 Journeys or 1,000 Things to See Before You Die. Books like those sort of travel type books. Came across Sarah Ferguson. Her book, she's the one that married Prince Andrew. She was Prince Andrew's wife. So there was her book there. There was a book on Diana that I think, if I remember correctly, came out after she passed away. It was sort of like a memorial book. What other ones were there in there? Oh, there was so many. And there was all these business books. Oh, my brain's just going blank right now. But there was a whole bunch of, actually, there weren't as many fiction books as I thought. But then I probably haven't found that box that has all the fiction stuff in it. There's just the odd one or two scattered here, unless they're, of course, from Brad's box, which had all of his Dragon Riders of Pern, the Dune books. He had some Star Trek books in there, some of the Tolkien books. Trying to think what else. What other books I had in there. But those were the only real fiction books I had there. From my fiction side, there was just a scattering amongst all of the nonfiction stuff that was there. But it was interesting seeing what was coming out of there and putting up on the shelves. And then I went and found another box of books, and I was like, oh, I don't have any room on that shelf. So now I'm going to start on the milk crates. But I did have everything on the shelves, and I had it like a shelf that was all my genealogy books. And then they sort of like were on a weird angle. I'm like, what's going on here? And like I said, it's a metal bookcase. So they have a metal piece that goes across the side that gets screwed in on either side to the back of the bookcase and the front of the bookcase. They were screwed in. They were fine. But somewhere along the line in transportation, the shelf, that piece that goes across, so you've got the shelf piece goes across here, and then from front to back goes this piece. It's about this wide. There's a ding in it. and that ding causes it to go. So the front and back, it just go, even though it's screwed in place and everything else, you'd think of it. So I'm going to have to find some way to shore that up, maybe get some doweling or something and just put it up there between the two so it helps hold the shelf up in place. And because if you put any weights of the book on it, it just goes from front to back, it looks like this. So this is the front, this is the back, and it looks like this. So I need something under there just to prop it up a little bit. So we're going to work on that one. And then I'll have a full bookcase full of books. But I'm now starting on the milk crates. I'm going to lay the milk crates on the side there. I've figured out I have 12, but with the space that I have for where it's going to go, I think I'm only going to end up using 8. If I remember correctly. I think I can get 3 on a mat and then I put 1 next to the bookcase, and I can stack them 2 high. I don't want to go 3 high because that's just a little too unsteady, unless I can get them all to clip together. If I can get them to clip together, then we're good. And I can find my string, then I can like wrap them around and sort of like tie them together as well. But yeah, so that project's coming along well. And then tomorrow I've got the guys coming in to do the air sealing, which they come in. Apparently they come in and they get up in the roof with all the duct work for the AC, and they go along and look for any leaks in there. They make sure basically that all the duct work is in good condition and that any leaks are sealed up. And they check for the airflow into different rooms and stuff. And like I can tell when I'm in the kitchen or the family room, it can get quite cold in there, but my bedroom does not. In the family room, I have 2 vents up in the ceiling. In the entire bedroom, which is about the same size as the family room, I've only got 1 vent in the ceiling, and that's it. So yes, Kathy, I'm going to get all my ducks in a row. Oh, that's a great idea, Craig. I can use cable ties. I actually came across the packet of cable ties that I have. They're all different fluorescent colors, so that will work perfectly. Use cable ties to hold the milk crates together. Great suggestion. Thank you. So yeah, so that's about it I've got from you. What you doing, Zeph? Zeffy, you've been asked to get in your chair. So Kathy, Zeffy's reaction was, she's laying on the floor, she puts her head up and looks at me. I said, you've been asked to get in the chair. She turns and looks at me, and then she just flops her head back down and goes back to sleep. So that's her reaction to your request for her to get into her chair. So anyway, that's it. I'm out of here for today. What are some of your favorite books? What are some books that you have on your bookcase that you haven't read yet? Let us know in the comments below. I'm always looking for great books to read. I've got a bookcase of books to read. And I'm looking at that bookcase and thinking, yeah, I've read probably about half of what's on my bookcase. Probably about half of what's currently on the bookcase. So we've still got a bit of work to do, but I'm always on the lookout because I don't read one book at a time. I will have up to 6 books on the go at any one time. Usually it's 1 or 2 fiction, and this includes audiobooks as well. So I currently have 1 nonfiction audiobook, 1 fiction book going on audio. And then on my Kindle, I have 1 fiction book I'm reading there. And then I have 2 nonfiction books physical books that I'm reading as well. And then, and with the audiobook, one of the audio nonfiction book, I also have the physical book, and I read them together at the same time because it just seems to stick better. I don't know what it is about seeing the words in print and holding the book and marking it up and highlighting it and all that sort of stuff and putting post-it notes all over the place. But also listening to it at the same time as I'm reading it, which means I have to speed up the audio because if I have to sit there and read at the same speed that they're reading at, so we have to speed up the audio so I don't get bored with going, yep. So, but anyway, that's it for today. I'm out of here. Let us know in the comments below, what are some of your favorite books to read? What are some that you have sitting on your bookshelf because you were told they were really, really good books? Or you happen to be at a function where you saw, which reminds me, I got Kyle, what was his name? Kyle Maynard? His book's really good. He's a guy who was born with no legs and no arms. He was a college level wrestler. And his book is just amazing. And I actually got to see him perform, speaking on stage at an event I was at. And at that same event, they had Chris Gardner, who wrote The Pursuit of Happiness. And his book is really cool. It goes into way more detail. The movie, The Pursuit of Happiness, that has Will Smith with his son, that book covers 1, possibly 2 chapters of the entire book. He's and he's a phenomenal presenter. And of course, he was on stage after the movie had come out. And but in the book, he is dealing with an infant son, not a 6 or 7-year-old son, as they have in the movie. So in the book, it's just him and his infant son that he's running around with and homeless with and all that sort of stuff. And Chris Gardner was on stage and he was talking about the book and the movie and how he was on site at the movie, seeing how the movie was done. And he saw a scene that Will Smith's son had done. And he says to Will Smith, he says, that kid's got more talent in his big toe than you have. and Will Smith turns to Chris Gardner and says, and if it was anybody else's big toe, they wouldn't be on the set. I always remember that story from Chris Gardner's speech that he did at a presentation that he did at an event I was at. So yes, I have those 2 books there, and they are great books, awesome books. Really talking about overcoming different type adversity in different ways, and overcoming obstacles in different ways. Both of them had obstacles to face and challenges and breakdowns and everything else, but it's how they kept moving, how they overcame those challenges, how they moved on or moved forward from them, because you never move on, you always move forward. So how they were able to move forward and overcome some of the challenges they had faced or work around the challenges that they had and that sort of stuff. They are excellent books, great motivational books to read. So anyway, that's it. We're out of here. Go out, have a super fantastic sparkling evening. I got to go walk a puppy. Zephyr, you want to go for a walk? Not a twitch. Anyway, so catch you guys tomorrow evening back here at 6 p.m. Pacific. And until then, have a super fantastic sparkling evening. He konara.